Hello and welcome to the second of our new member CPD sessions. This one is on 5 ideas for your Key Stage 3 geography curriculum. So my name is Dr. Becky Kitchen. I'm the Head of Professional Development at the Geographical Association. And the first thing I want to do is to say a massive welcome to the GA. The Geographical Association is there to support you as a geography teacher, and if you've got any questions or you want to get into contact with anybody, my email is on the screen, so you can email me anytime with any sort of issue or question that you have, and I will try and help. I've also put the website of the GA on the slide as well. That has a huge amount of information. It contains links to all our events, so you can book CPD there. It's got our online shop, plus you can get access to our online journals, and there's lots of support and guidance there, and hundreds of teaching resources. So that's the place to go. Have a browse, have a look, and chances are there'll be some really useful information there too. So what we're going to be looking at today is just some ideas for developing a Key Stage 3 geography curriculum. Now, this is the sort of thing that I tend to run as a full day consultancy or CPD, but in the space of sort of half an hour, 40 minutes, hopefully I'll be able to give you some ideas which can get you started. So when you're designing a curriculum, and it doesn't really matter whether it's Key Stage 3, 4 or 5, I like to think about it like a journey. And as with any good journey, you have to kind of know where you're going. The importance of this is so that everybody knows, and that's teachers, heads of department, pupils, you all know what you're trying to achieve, and what geography is going to be central and important in your curriculum. Now, to a certain extent, particularly at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, that's already dictated through the specifications that you choose to teach for GCSE and A-level. But there's a lot more freedom at GCSE, at Key Stage 3. And so one of the things I think it's quite useful to do is to start by drawing yourself a stick person. And this stick person is going to represent what you want your ideal geographer to look like by the end of Key Stage 3. You can do another one for Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 if you like, but think about the end point of that Key Stage. What knowledge, what skills do you want them to have? You can see on the slide here, this is an example of one. And it's likely that actually a lot of geography teachers will have something fairly similar. So this one, for example, has got knowledge of the world. Can you name places? Can you locate them on an atlas or map? Do you understand this idea of place? Something around map work. Being environmentally aware, being able to evaluate data, being a team worker. So you can see that you might have very, very similar ideas. But the key to this is understanding where you're going, understanding what you want the end point to be, because your curriculum is the kind of vehicle that helps pupils on that journey. Now, whilst you might want all of those things to kind of be the outcome, there's going to be some things that you might want to foreground and you might want to focus on. And you can see those are highlighted here. So there are 3 things. There's lots of things that this ideal geographer has in terms of knowledge and skills. But the 3 most important are highlighted as understanding key geographical concepts of space, location and landforms, being inquisitive and be able to inquire and ask questions. And the 3rd one is fieldwork experience. And so those are the 3 kind of what I would call golden threads or strands that this particular curriculum will weave through and make the real focus. The other things are going to be important too, but it's really important to identify those things that you think are really important in your curriculum. So that's quite a useful activity to do as a starting point. Where are you going? Where do you want to kind of finish up and your ideal geographer leaving at the end of Key Stage 3? So once you've got your kind of end point and your ideal geographer and where you want to get to, you need to think a little bit about the type of curriculum that you want. And I saw this in a talk a few years ago, and I just think it's incredibly useful as a bit of a sort of a way of thinking about a curriculum. So the question is, do you want a Game of Thrones curriculum or do you want a Simpsons curriculum? So if we think about The Simpsons, Simpsons is a very, very entertaining, fun program. It contains a limited number of characters whose development is quite superficial. So there's Bart. He's always 10. He's always a bit cheeky. There's Lisa. I think she's a little bit younger. She's very, very intelligent and she's quite, outspoken. That's kind of about it. You've got characters there. They don't really develop. They're quite superficial. The other thing about The Simpsons is that each episode is self-contained. So you can actually sit down on a Sunday morning and watch an episode of The Simpsons and just enjoy it for what it is. You don't really have to have seen any other episodes. You don't have to have watched it in sequence. The only way you can really tell if it's an older episode or a newer episode is really the quality of the cartoon drawing and the technology. So it's quite fun. It's quite entertaining. And you can watch it out of sequence. It doesn't really matter. That's your Simpsons curriculum. And I think it doesn't take a huge leap to see what lessons might be like. If you have a Simpsons curriculum, they're quite entertaining, they're quite fun, but actually, are you developing the characters? We'll talk about those in a minute. Is there any sort of links or narratives between the lessons? And actually, is it that kind of dipping in and dipping out? It's not well sequenced. Contrast that with Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, if you've seen it, is quite a difficult watch, but it's worth the investment. And with Game of Thrones, there's a huge number of characters, and they become more complex and their characters develop over the course of several seasons. It's a kind of, if you miss a few minutes, it's very, very difficult to understand where you are because each episode links to all of the others and you have to watch everything in order. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. And as a consequence, the plot and characters are quite complex and detailed. And again, it doesn't take, a huge leap to really understand that that's the sort of curriculum that we really want. We want a curriculum that is worthwhile for pupils to be invested in. And it might not be fun and easy, at times, but it's worth the investment. Geography is a really complex subject, and so there are going to be a large number of characters. And actually, we want to see those sort of characters or concepts develop over several seasons or years. And we want each lesson to link to the others. So you can look back and build on your knowledge, but also look forward and see kind of how what you're doing now links to other topics. And there needs to be some sort of sequencing. Now, the way that I sequence my lessons in a particular topic may not be the same as the way that you link and sequence them, but there has to be some sort of sequencing, because actually, if you don't do that, it doesn't make sense. And really justifying your sequencing is kind of one of the key aspects of curriculum design and understanding sort of the things that you can do with the Key Stage 3 curriculum. And as a consequence, part of the amazingness of geography is that actually geographers are brilliant at seeing the connections between things. And I think if you don't have a Game of Thrones curriculum, it's very hard to see those links. Whereas actually, making them all the time, it's almost sort of hardwired into the curriculum. So 2 things really. First of all, starting with the end in mind, really understanding where it is that you want to get to in your journey, but also trying to have a bit of a Game of Thrones curriculum, understanding that your curriculum design is going to be quite complex, it needs to be well sequenced, and that you're going to have it in a particular order. So I talked about characters, and I talked about developing your characters. And in geography, I think you can substitute the word characters for concepts, or for those things actually that in your stick person you really identified as being important. So here we have, this is from a book, Designing Your 11 to 16 Coherent Geography Curriculum, which you can get in the GA shop. But what it does is it has several case studies of different schools who have designed their curriculum so that it's well sequenced, it's really clear. And you can see here that actually, in the same way that I might sequence, or I might have characters that are slightly different to yours, in the same way, we've got 5 schools here that have got very different characters that their curriculum is sort of working with. Now, obviously, there are some similarities. Place appears in most, but not all, of these case studies. We've also got things like physical processes, inequality scale, change over time. You can see that Gravely School is the one with the most. They've got 8 concepts that they sort of weave through, 8 characters that they develop over their curriculum. And you compare that with Harris, who've got sort of 5. So that's the sort of number that you need to be kind of thinking about, between about sort of, 5 and 8 concepts. Anything more than that is a little bit unwieldy. Anything less than that, and it can be hard to keep the focus of your curriculum. So identifying some of the concepts that you think are important. And as I said to you at the beginning, your stick person, it's likely that lots of geography teachers will have very similar things. But you can see here that what they've decided to shine a light on and the characters that they've decided to use are different. And that will give their curriculum a real kind of flavour that is clear for their pupils in their school. So it's about what you're shining a light on, and these are the characters that you're going to develop in your curriculum. Now, I'm sort of talking a little bit as though you have a blank slate on which to start. This process of curriculum design is much easier if you do have a blank slate for curriculum design, but it's very easy to actually pick out those things and those kind of concepts or golden threads that you might want to focus on, and it might be that you just need to do a little bit of sort of rejigging of your curriculum rather than any sort of completely starting from scratch. I just want to show you how this sort of works in practice, and this is an example from one of our quality mark schools. So we run the Geography Quality Mark, which is an opportunity for schools to have that sort of external accreditation of the quality of the geography that they do. And I want to show you how this school has chosen the characters, chosen the concepts that they're going to foreground in their curriculum, and how they've then woven that into their curriculum so that their curriculum is the progression model. It's quite complex, and I know that it took a long time for this to happen and for them to work this through, but it's probably the most sophisticated sort of Game of Thrones process that I've seen in a curriculum. So here we have the 8 concepts that this school has chosen to foreground for their geographers, the characters that they've chosen to sort of build into their curriculum. And what they've done is they've defined what those underpinning concepts are so that they can share them with pupils. I think my personal view, and I know that this is not sort of universal, is that it's quite a useful idea to sort of share the concepts with pupils and obviously other geography teachers so that you're sort of almost making that journey visible. But you can see here they've got 8 concepts which they've put in student-friendly language so that pupils understand what those concepts are and what they're working towards. So the next thing that this geography department have done is they've taken one of their units. So this is Brazil, their topic on Brazil, which I think they do in year 7. And what they've done is for each of the concepts, each of the characters, they've identified how they appear in this unit. So you can see, unit on Brazil, for their sustainability is in that unit because they know what sustainability means. They're using the three-legged stool to describe sustainability, and they've looked at Curitiba, which is a Brazilian city, and how concepts and ideas in Curitiba could help shape future cities. If we look at development, they're looking at the fact that development is a complex issue, but they can look at different indicators and know the HDI score of Brazil compared to other countries. So you can see how in that one unit, each of the concepts is manifesting itself in a particular way. And that's enabled them to target each of those concepts within the unit, and also to have a unit that's really, I suppose, coherent and really effective. So this is something that you can do for your units, your existing units. You can take your schemes of work, you can have a look at your topics, you can have a look at your concepts that you've identified that you want to build and develop throughout your curriculum. And you can say, okay, so how do we hit that in this unit? And if the answer is, well, we don't, maybe that's where you need a bit of a tweak. Maybe actually you think, okay, let's tweak this a little bit. So instead of focusing on this, we're focusing on that, and that'll hit the concept a little bit more. It's worth saying that, not in my view, you don't have to hit every concept in every unit. We have major characters and we have minor characters in Game of Thrones. So, some of your concepts might be more major and may appear in every unit. Others might be a little bit sort of taking a bit of a backseat. They're there, but they're less important. They might appear in various topics, but maybe not each one. It's completely up to you. That's so far so good. This is where it gets really quite sophisticated, though. So I explained that sort of sequencing was really important in a Game of Thrones curriculum, because actually the character development is really complex, and so it needs to be sequenced really clearly. And that means that actually, if you spend time thinking about your curriculum as a progression model, it's hardwired in there for you. And you don't have to worry so much about building progression in afterwards. So this is what this school have done. They've taken each of the concepts that appear in each of the units, and what they've tried to do is to sequence them so that there is progression between year 7, 8 and 9 with the concepts. Okay, I'll show you what that means in a second, but before I do that, it's worth just highlighting that how have they selected these concepts that they're working with in the first place. Well, this particular school have chosen to actually look at the concepts that underpin the A-level specification and pick some of those and bring them right the way down to Key Stage 3, so they're building those concepts all the way through. You can do it other ways. You can think about those things that are really important, that everybody in your department thinks, yeah, actually, those are the things that we want to develop the most with our stick person, our perfect geographers at the end of Key Stage 3. So how does this progression work? So I'm going to show you what it looks like for the concept of development. And you can see, we know that development appears in each of the units. And what they've done is they've shuffled the units around a little bit to mean that actually there is progression within those concepts. Okay, so development appears in all of the topics in some way or another. But the way that it appears in year 7 is less complex than year 8. And it's less complex in year 8 than it is in year 9. So, for example, you can see that in year 7, they're looking at questions like, what does the word development mean? And what are all places as developed as others? What are the different levels of development? What is trade? All those sorts of things. By the time we get to year 8, we're looking at development not in terms of what it is, but why it's complex. We're looking at development indicators as a way of measuring development. We're looking at challenges. We're looking at what developing countries can teach the rest of the world. And by the time we've got to year 9, we're really getting to some sort of sophisticated ideas around development. So why should we consider development as a continuum, for example? How do development indicators compare across the world? How does development compare within a country? So you've got that really kind of moving from sort of definitional aspects of development to more kind of complex and even more sophisticated and complex by the time you get to year 9. Now, as I said, this kind of whole sort of warp and weft of concepts within a curriculum is quite difficult to achieve, but you can see the different stages for creating that. You start with your concepts, you identify those things that you want to have as really strong things that go through your curriculum. You then define what they are so that everybody knows what they mean. You then look at the individual units and think, how is the concept manifesting itself within this unit? And some people might want to stop there, because actually those things are going to be, if they're the sort of foregrounded characters, actually you're already building quite a strong curriculum framework. And then really the icing on the cake is that sort of building in progression, identifying how you can progress in each of those concepts, in each of those characters, from year 7 to year 8 to year 9. Okay, so we had, first of all, we were doing our stick person. That was where we were going, sort of our destination, maybe identifying our concepts and key things there. We then had the question, do you want a Game of Thrones curriculum or a Simpsons curriculum? We really want a Game of Thrones curriculum, which is quite complex and developmentary. And then we've chosen our characters. We've chosen these things that we're going to weave through and that are going to kind of be that sort of progression for our curriculum. So the fourth thing is around progress. How do we know our progress? And this is quite a useful diagram for thinking about sort of curriculum. And the idea, here we've chosen place as the concept. So place is one of the characters that is going to be developed. And the idea is that you start off, let's say, at the beginning of year 7, which is A, with something that's quite tangible, which is something that pupils really understand, and that you have a little bit of time exploring place, possibly in the sort of home local area, so students get a really good understanding of place at that sort of local scale before moving up to B. Maybe that's the end of year 7, and then through to C. Maybe that's the beginning of year 8, and by the time they get to H, which let's say is the beginning of A level, or you know, during their A level studies, that's the point at which place as a concept is really, really understood. But in order to get there from A to H, you've got to journey through points B, C, D, E, F, and G. And at each level, there is going to be that sort of growing understanding of place. But you can also see that each layer is elongated. And so that means there has to be several opportunities within that sort of same layer to understand that idea of place before moving up to the next layer. So by the time we get to H, we've got quite sophisticated understanding. At A, we're starting off, you know, really quite locally and something quite tangible. And you can do this for each of your concepts, your characters. And I suppose the kind of key point here is that if you are only looking at a concept, let's say place, if you're only looking at place once a year, there isn't that opportunity for pupils to really explore what place means. Similarly, you know, fieldwork, if you're only doing fieldwork once a year, then there's not really that opportunity for them to really build progression and to really understand and explore. And you might have seen my previous new member webinar when I was looking at sort of 5 ideas for fieldwork, and that sort of really key thing that you don't have to get on a bus. It's really, you know, you can build it into the curriculum, so there's lots of little opportunities that kind of build that understanding of the concept that they're looking at, whether it's fieldwork, place, development, you know, whatever. I also want to just spend a little bit of time thinking about assessment, because what is assessment? So to me, assessment is a key aspect. It's kind of like we're going on a journey to this, perfect geographer. We're building a vehicle that's going to take us there. That's the curriculum. What is assessment? Assessment is how we know how far we've got on that journey. And I think very often assessment is kind of used as a word for test or exam. And I find this grid really useful for thinking about assessment. It's a table which is often called sort of a mixed economy of assessment. And it's basically saying, look, there are lots of different types of knowledge. We've got factual knowledge. Can you give me some examples of volcanic eruptions, for example? We've got conceptual knowledge. That's kind of more about theories. We've got procedural knowledge, which is our skills. And then we've got our sort of metacognitive knowledge, which is around sort of learning how we learn. So we've got different knowledge kind of dimensions, I suppose. And then we've also got different sort of ways of knowing as well. So we've got, can you remember or recognize those things? Can you understand them? Can you apply them? Can you analyze them, evaluate them, create them? And my concern with assessment is that if we are only doing, recall tests, that's only looking at one or possibly even two cells in this kind of mixed constitution of assessment. It's, can you remember some factual knowledge, essentially? And the issue is that if we do that all the time, pupils get really good at remembering factual knowledge. But you can see that there are whole other aspects of geographical knowledge that they don't have an opportunity to explore. And so one of the I quite like using this as a cover sheet for topics. And again, I'm not sort of suggesting that in every topic you would have some sort of assessment that covers each of these cells. Not at all. But instead, throughout a key stage or throughout a year, you would expect these cells all to be hit at some point. Obviously, some are much harder than others. So, for example, the creation, that generation, that planning, that producing something, maybe for metacognitive knowledge, that's producing revision cards, for example. Or, for procedural knowledge, you're creating a map or you're creating something that is going to sort of demonstrate your understanding of geographical skills. So some of them, like the create column, are going to take more time than doing a sort of multiple choice quiz at the beginning of the lesson, which is around sort of recall and factual knowledge. But my view is that you have to build in this mixed constitution of assessment, because otherwise, how do you know how embedded and how far along that journey of curriculum design and realization, how far you've got? Okay, so I think this is a useful as I said, cover sheet that you can use to go, okay, how far on that journey are we? How well developed is their fieldwork? How well developed is their understanding of place? And try and hit it, each of these cells at some point during the year or key stage, so that you're building up a really rich picture of what pupils can know and can do. And the final, my kind of final fifth top tip really is around impact. I think so. The language that Ofsted uses are intent. That's, to my mind, that's our stick person. It's kind of where are we going and what's your vision. Then we've got implementation, and that's the curriculum itself, the design of the curriculum, the teaching. And then the third one is impact. And very often in the quality mark submissions that we see, bearing in mind the quality mark submissions that we see are generally really, really strong, the intent is always really well thought out. The implementation is fantastic. And then the impact tends to be seen as a little bit of a kind of, we've got great GCSE results. And so I think it is worth thinking a little bit about impact and almost designing it in at the beginning. How are you going to know that your curriculum is any good? How are you going to know that your curriculum is working? And very often, the answer to that is but GCSE results. And don't get me wrong, I think GCSE results are really important in understanding impact. I don't think you're going to create a curriculum that doesn't make those better. But actually, there are lots of other different spotlights that we can shine onto our curriculum that can be held by lots of different people. So you can see here on the slide, you've got, is our curriculum working? And you've got these kind of spotlights being shone onto the curriculum. And yes, standardized tests, GCSE results are one of those torches. Probably going to be held by the school leadership team, that torch. But there are other people as well who we might want to know the impacts that our curriculum is having on them. So, for example, it might, schools with whom we network, they might be holding a torch. The GAs, as the subject association, might be holding a torch. That's where kind of quality mark comes in. One of the things that we do as a subject association is shine a light on your curriculum and go, that's really good. That bit there is absolutely brilliant. And you've identified that this is an area that you want to work on. Fantastic. It's that external accreditation. Pupils are going to, hold one of your torches and give you some feedback on whether your curriculum is working. I'm a great believer in pupil voice and in involving pupils in their learning and thinking about, what it is, what's working, what needs tweaking, all those sorts of things. Local employers may have a voice, may have a spotlight. Ofsted also may be holding one of those torches. Governors, they might have a view, they might be interested if you're part of an academy trust, and parents too. So all of those people, all of those associations, all of those groups may be holding one of these spotlights. And what might they be particularly focusing on? Well, they might be focusing on GCSE results, but they also might be interested in how many GCSE students you've got and what your uptake is. They might be interested in your engagement and how you're engaging pupils and really giving them those kind of that knowledge, understanding and skills that's so important for a geography education. They might be interested in behaviour. They might be interested in the ability to think geographically and how you can demonstrate that. They might be interested in the quality of what students are achieving, or their commitment to learning, or a whole host of other things that they might be interested in. So I think one of the things that is really important to think about is, first of all, who is holding your torches? There will be several people, organisations holding your torches and thinking about, is your curriculum working, and shining a spotlight on them. And then thinking about what those torches are shining a spotlight on. And you can see that in that bottom image there. The things that they might be particularly interested. And so actually, if we just focus on GCSE results, we need to think about other things too. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through 5 ideas for your curriculum. Go back to the beginning here. 5 ideas for your Key Stage 3 curriculum. You can apply that thinking to Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 too. As I said, it's a little bit harder because you have the specifications already. But actually, thinking and thinking about how you're going to weave those concepts throughout from Key Stage 3 upwards is really quite useful. So a quick whistle-stop tour. Think about your end point, start with the end in mind, think about your stick person and what kind of characteristics you want to really pill out. Think about whether you want a Game of Thrones curriculum, you do, or a Simpsons curriculum. Think about the characters that you want to develop, those concepts or golden threads that you want to weave through. Think about how you're going to know how far you've got and that mixed constitution of assessment. And then the 5th idea is to think about impact and think about who's holding the torches and how you'll know if what you're doing is working for your geography curriculum. So I hope that's been helpful. As I said, if you want to get in touch with me, my contact details are there. You can ask me any questions that you like, and also do visit the GA website because there's lots of support and guidance on there as well as hundreds of teaching resources, and also links to our journals and events. Okay, so thanks ever so much, and hope to see you on the 3rd webinar.